engagement on this webinar series, which is really designed to help us explore not only the new standards for family school partnerships, but to learn from each other, reflect together on how we can improve our efforts and deepen this important work. IEL is a home for the Coalition for Community Schools, has a whole area of work around family and community engagement, including a national network of district leaders, the District Leaders Network on Family and Community Engagement. And across all of our work, we know that family and community engagement is critically important. And so our examination and our deeper exploration of these new standards really adds to that. Now more than ever, engaging families, authentically listening to parents and students, and collaborating across boundaries are the processes we need to get to the solutions we want. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce my partner and dear friend, Helen Westmoreland, who's the Director of Family Engagement at the National PTA, where she leads the association in managing their Center for Family Engagement. Helen?
Oh, thank you, Kwesi. It is such a pleasure to get to work with you and the entire IEL team. You are not just great partners, but great individuals, just great people. So very fortunate to be able to do that. Here at National PTA, our mission is to engage and empower families and communities to advocate for all children, partnering with like-minded organizations like IEL and the four incredible groups you're going to hear from today is so important as to help achieve that mission. For those of you who are new to PTA, we're an organization of nearly 3 million members working together to make every child's potential a reality. Now we are very excited for today's conversation in our Transforming Family School Partnerships with National PTA's webinar series. We are here today because we all know that families are critical partners in providing a high quality education for our young people. And based on decades of research, we obviously also know that students whose families are engaged do better in life. They are more successful. And teachers and schools are also better off when they invest in engaging families. The question for all of us is no longer if family engagement matters, but how we can do it in a way that helps and uplifts our communities, schools, and young people. So the question is, this question is why over 20 years ago, National PTA created the National Standards for Family School Partnerships. These standards set the bar for how we all can work together to support student success. Since their initial creation, these PTA National Standards for Family School Partnerships have been used by PTAs, schools, districts, state education agencies, and even the U.S. Department of Education for accountability and support for strong family engagement. Before now, National PTA's Standards for Family School Partnerships were last updated in 2008. And I don't have to tell those of you on today's webinar that a lot has changed in our world since 2008. So last year, National PTA began the process of updating these national standards for family school partnerships with three big goals. First, to incorporate more recent research and best practice. Second, to purposefully uplift and integrate the perspective of families, educators, and young people, particularly those who are often most historically marginalized from our school system, into defining what good family school partnerships look like. And third, to improve the overall effectiveness and usefulness of these standards across a variety of audiences. So how do we do this? We had the great pleasure of partnering with PTAs and other nonprofits across the country to ensure we're hearing from people who haven't always had a seat at the table. We are very proud of the inclusive process we used and listened to over 600 families, educators, community leaders, students, about what they want for the future of family school partnerships. We also scanned best practices in the evidence base and engaged an incredible expert advisory group of leading researchers and practitioners, including Kwesi, who's here with us today, to guide this update. So with these updated national standards for family school partnerships, you can expect 4 things. And we hope you will check them out. Daniel is putting some links in the chat below. First, you will see that the 6 main standards: welcoming all families, communicating effectively, supporting student success, speaking up for every child, sharing power, and collaborating with the community are still the important. They are still the big 6 things that we want all schools, PTAs, and those working with the schools and PTAs to be striving for. But there have been some pretty significant changes at the goals and indicators levels of these standards. So second, this update explicitly centers equity and inclusion, including guidance to help schools partner with our increasingly diverse families. National PTA is committed to making every child's potential a reality. And when we say every child, we mean every child. Third, with this update, PTA's national standards now reflect a broadened vision of student success that recognizes the important ways that families and schools collaborate around student achievement and well-being. So in 2008, student success was largely synonymous with achievement as measured by standardized tests. Those things are still important, but we have such a more holistic view of what our young people need to thrive now. And that is reflected in these updated standards. And then lastly, we've really tried to be explicit about who these are for, right? So these are for schools, these are for PTA leaders, so that they can work together. So that rule clarification is important. Today's session, we're going to highlight the first of these updated national standards for family school partnerships, Welcome All Families. The goals of this standard are to create a welcoming climate and to build a respectful, inclusive school community. Our update this past year has emphasized the more specific practices that schools should use to create a climate of belonging for all families. So I am so excited that we are going to get sort of past the language on a piece of paper to the real lived experiences of folks that are working to make sure all families feel welcomed and that they belong to their school community and that they have an important role in their child's education. And I'm really excited to hear about all of the work that they have been doing around this first standard. I am going to let our great moderator introduce the rest of the panel, but will start by introducing Kenya Bradshaw, who is an incredible person. As a personal side note, she has great tips for how to reduce your Comcast bill, which I have already taken advantage of, Kenya. Kenya is the Chief Program Officer of Reconstruction.us, an industry leader in curriculum development that celebrates Black-centered education, Black joy, and Black culture. Kenya, please take us away for this incredible conversation, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Helen, for having me. Welcome everyone to our family table this afternoon. I am so excited to be moderating this panel. For me, it is the actualization of years of work around a belief that we are stronger together and that we bring a plethora of identities to our table. So I bring to you the identity of a Black woman who lives in the South and who wears the moniker of Auntie very proudly in our work. We have a beautiful panel that really represents the organizing principle of people being proximate to the work that they have the privilege of doing. And this afternoon, Daniel is putting in the chat box now the full bios of all of our speakers. And so please take a look, because I am not going to do them the full justice of sharing their wonderful and illuminating bios that really represent the entirety of the work that they do. But I'm going to give you a snippet so that we can move into our Q&A session with them, and they can share with you more about how we are being intentional on thinking about the diverse identities of that parents bring to the table and that our students are with. So we are joined now by Liz Rios, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Restorative Justice Works. Her background in sociology and personal understanding of the impacts of incarceration led to her work to serve system-impacted communities. Thank you, Liz, for joining us. We then have Debbie Riley, who is the CEO and the co-founder of the Center for Adoption Support and Education. It is a nonprofit adoptive family support center that is based in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. She is a nationally recognized adoption expert and is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 40 years of professional experience. Last but never least, we have Regina Elmi, who is the Executive Director of Supporting Partnerships in Education and Beyond, SPEB, formerly known as the Somali Parents Education Board. She is a champion of community leadership and placing parents in leadership roles so that they are the ones that are advocating for the best interests of their children. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And we're going to start with really a question session for our amazing panelists. Each of our panelists works in specific underrepresented populations that interact uniquely with school environments. To start our Q&A conversation, I would like to pose a couple of questions to our panelists, but we are also going to hear questions from each of you. So if something that our panelists says it sparks something in you, please put your question in the chat box and Daniel will be capturing them. And we'll have a Q&A at the end. Can each of you please describe to our panelists, can each of you please describe a specific example of excellent contributions towards creating schools of belonging with the populations that you have the privilege of working with? And I'm going to start with Regina.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be amongst fierce leaders across this country. And of course, to have many families that are joining us. School of belonging. I can give, there's so many examples, but I can't take the credit. I have an amazing community that I have the privilege to work alongside and not to do for, but to do with. I'll give an example of one of our local districts here, Highline School District. We have a large population of immigrant families and also undocumented. And one of the things that we did before the pandemic was we asked the school board that we wanted to actually amend their racial equity policy. And the biggest contribution came from parents. So we had several meetings and making sure that we were very careful with what languages were being written into their equity policy, but also not just using the word equity, but using a racial equity lens. And there were like keywords, for example, like how we talk about ELL families in a deficit way, but actually using it in an asset way, because Highline School District has a goal of 2025, every entering kindergarten should have an opportunity to graduate as a dual language and get the World by Literacy seal on their diploma. So when you say that, also your language has to reflect and your practices. So that created a lot of belonging, where also for the first time in the state of Washington, we started a heritage program for the Somali community. Which is something that we're very much proud of. And it was co-designed and co-created with families and youth. So to me, when I see the contribution of our community, that is creating a legacy work and also a belonging.
Thank you so much, Regina. I'm going to turn it over to Liz for the same question. Describing the excellent contributions that you have a specific example towards creating schools of belonging with the populations you have the privilege of working with.
Thank you, Kenya. So I am with the Center for Restorative Justice Works, also known as CRJW. And what we do is we provide direct services to system impacted children and caregivers throughout the state of California. We are based out of the Los Angeles area. So we do this in the form of an annual event that we do. We essentially take children and their caregivers to visit their incarcerated parents at the prisons. And we do it in a form of a quality visiting day. It's very specialized, very different from your typical visiting day. So with that said, the direct service that we do provide, we want to get as many folks involved as possible. So my example speaks to a very specific example. I actually got a call from an educator some time ago who's asking about the program, and gave her all the information. She shared that she found that she had some children in her classroom that she knew had incarcerated parents. So she wanted to learn more so she could share the resource. And typically what we've done in the past is we've shared our information, our program flyers and so on with schools, but typically placed in like a resource area for families to that have access to that. But in this case, we gave the teacher specifically the program flyers information regarding our program. And what she did is she shared it with her classroom and spoke about not just our resource, but other resources to the classroom, and shared it with all students, which we hadn't done it this way before. Like, as mentioned, it was more of a broad share that we did. A few weeks after that, we received a call from the parent asking more questions. It just so happened that we did serve the institution that she was inquiring about, and we were able to just take it from there. But my point to that is, we have the resources available in certain areas, but what this teacher did is specifically brought it to the children who otherwise probably wouldn't have seen the resource. So I use that as an example where the teacher took time to speak about it and directed that in her classroom. And because of that, we were able to connect with a family and offer our resources. So yeah, I just wanted to share that part. Thank you, Kenya.
Thank you, Liz. Debbie?
Debbie,
We
you're
can't
on
hear
mute.
you. Can you unmute?
How did that happen? I knew somebody was going to do that, and that would be me. Yeah, so I want to share two examples and sort of ground all this when we think about the overrepresentation of this population of children, that on any given day, there are over 400,000 children that are in foster care, and over 1.5 million children that have been adopted. So I want to talk a little bit about the feelings of differentness, and that it's important to acknowledge that youth in care and those that are being parented by caregivers or who have been adopted feel often different from their peers and are seen as different. Their family is formed in a different way. And so one standard of excellence that we've been seeing across the country is during November's National Adoption Month. It's a time to celebrate the joys as well as the challenges, but many of our local school systems now have taken advantage of an opportunity to really celebrate adoption by creating murals in the hallway at schools, by having different books in the library, maybe by having a parent come in and read a book surrounding adoption or something that has to interface with families are different, by having kinship caregivers. So that was one example of excellence that we've been seeing present across the country in our school systems. And the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to is schools that are reaching out to have experts like ourselves come in to do audits around classroom assignments and certain aspects of curricular development. So exercises as, bring in a baby picture, or do a family tree, or write your biography, or what did you do over the summer, and share that is very difficult for a lot of our children and families who are experiencing levels of impermanence and multiple caregivers and a lot of movement in their life. Or maybe no one has a baby picture because they don't have that historical information. Also around curriculum of being very sensitive to the histories of children who have adverse of early life experiences, trauma, in thinking about what is it that we're exposing the children to that might be really triggering. So I think best practice is having this sensitivity to the early life experiences that many of our children have unfortunately been impacted by, and how we can make the school setting much more of a safer and inclusive environment.
Debbie, thank you so much for that. Sharing something personal. My two youngest nephews came to us through foster care, and we are undertaking the adoption process. And it has been so helpful for the support of organizations like yours to be able to help us being able to define like family is more than just blood, and how we have the privilege of raising two beautiful boys in our extended network family. And our conversation today centers around welcoming all families. When you think about the work that needs to be done to welcome and engage adoptive, foster, and kinship families, what do you think we should share with the audience around some best practices on how schools can be more conscious, both of family structure and how they reach out to students' caregivers?
Well, I want to first start with the issue of bias and stigma because I still think there's a lot of stigmatization around youth and care and adoption and what biases that we bring in as professionals. So I think it starts with ourselves first to do that search. I think that it's important to understand the adversity that I mentioned earlier that many of the students are coming into the classroom with, but most importantly, is to see our families, these unique family structures, as partners and not as adversarial individuals that can't join us along the way and to ensure the outcomes for our children. And I think many of our parents feel like they're being blamed for histories that they weren't a part of. And they really want to be at the table. The other thing that I want to say is oftentimes we're asking them to give us information that they just don't have, and they feel very inadequate. I really appreciate, Kenya, what you're sharing from your personal experiences. So I just want you to be cognizant about how you're approaching the families that I'm talking about today, and the fact that they may not be able to come in with histories that you're looking for to help better understand why a child or a teen might be struggling academically or behaviorally or socially in the classroom. And I guess to understand that we ourselves are very important role models. Again, for many of the children did not have a consistent caretaker or role model in their life. So we become very important in being there for them and advocating on their behalf. And, I think understanding some of the challenges that they present and finding more creative solutions of how to address those challenges.
Thank you so much. Another factor that's happening in our country is really the opening of our global borders. And so our communities are much more diverse than they have been in the last 20, 50, or even education in the last 80 years. Regina, your work on being a Somali both mother and supporter of immigrant families within the education system is really profound on how we can be more inclusive to both international and immigrant families. Can you describe for our audience some of the challenges and opportunities as they relate to engaging those populations? And what actions do you feel like that we can do as schools and as family support organizations to create a more welcoming environment for immigrant and refugee families?
Yeah, I quickly, very briefly, I can share this story very long, but I came into this work, I come from corporate background. So nonprofit is not what I used to do long time ago, and I grew up in the DC area, but I came into this work when my eldest was in kindergarten and I was new to Washington. We were in a very affluent district, and then I used to get like little notes from her teacher every day. And I'm thinking like a 5-year-old, what could they possibly do? But it wasn't her. It was me showing up and the way I looked. And I felt me growing up here, just because I'm wearing a hijab, you think, I don't belong in this community, but I'm very privileged. And I have a lot of access and I have a lot of doors that are open for me. And that is due to the community that cultivated me when I first came in here. And coming from DC, that is the African-American community, and I'm forever indebted to them. And I know that I don't have the lived experience as an immigrant woman, but that's the community that supported me when I was in school. They were my advocates and my champion. When we talk about our immigrant communities, I think really stepping away from looking at them of like immigrant, undocumented, they're struggling, they're coming here, but really looking back into the history of this nation. This nation is based on immigrants and also bringing people without their own willing and using them and benefiting from it. So one thing that we're doing at SPEB, and the reason why we changed our name, is that we know that we cannot just say that we're working with Somali families. In order for community to thrive, we need to create bridges and build relationships so that our collective community, even though they're bringing their own diverse and their own ethnic self and the way they're identifying, but building those bridges so that they become each other's advocate. So that when we have something happening in our undocumented community, I always challenge my own community that I'm born into. What are you doing to make sure that you're showing up? Because when we had, Islamophobia, so many communities showed up, right? Like when someone was pulling my hijab, I had people that I don't even identify with saying, how dare you do that? Or like, and vice versa. So making sure that we're building bridges. I think it's beyond just immigrants, but it's really, first of all, recognizing how our immigrant community shows up and also like the many cultures that we have, but really celebrating that. And I think when it comes to schools, right now, I know that, many districts that we're working with, they really are trying their way of like moving away from, we need to do like diversity night or like cultural responsiveness, but more like, how do we actually partner with our families and learn from them because they hold the knowledge in order for us to be the best educators that we can be. I keep using Highline, but Highline is one of our best partners, and they do have great practices because they actually participate in the work that we're doing, and they show up. And it's not like the community and family engagement person only, but district leaders actually come in. And that is a great model. When you have a district that is actually investing and getting to know the community they serve, it serves the district well.
Regina, thank you so much. I'm a little jealous of how you've described Highline and their amazing work on engaging families. I think it presents an opportunity for all of us to be able to learn from. One of the questions that I have for each of you is, Regina talked a little bit about building bridges and how we can be more intentional about engaging families. One of the audience members said translation is not authentic engagement. And so I would love to hear from you all around, it is a tactic, but how do we move beyond just that piece to be able to authentically engage the diverse families that we have in our communities? And what I'd like to ask of you is, can you share like one specific tactic that they as PTA members or school districts can do to be able to be more intentional about engaging families?
Is your question particularly around translation?
No, it's not particularly on translation. I'm saying it is a tactic. My question is really about how do we authentically engage families? And so asking each of you, what is a tactic, like what is a specific strategy that you either use or have seen districts do to be able to authentically engage families? Is that clear?
Yeah, got it.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna pop it to Liz first.
Thank you, Kenya. So with that question, I would say, and I have to echo what, excuse me, what Debbie mentioned earlier in terms of stigma. Children of incarcerated parents definitely have that stigma. On my personal experience, I had an incarcerated parent through elementary school, junior high, and high school. So the entire educational span of mine, I never shared that my dad was incarcerated. That was something that, mainly because of the stigma, I didn't want to have the follow-up questions. I didn't want the, what happened, what did he do? All those things that I expected would come. So the thing is that's still very much prevalent, and it's perpetuated, admittedly by all of us, right? We have this certain perspective of incarcerated people, and we pass that on to the children as well. So they can see that, they can feel it, and for that reason, it does become a challenge to identify for the rest of us if someone is struggling with that. Dealing with an incarcerated parent, because when your parent becomes incarcerated, we tend to forget that the child is also experiencing a separation from that parent. And then, all these other issues come up where they're dealing with unstable households because of that. Right now, we can say that 2.7 million, I think that's the latest number that we have, 2.7 million children currently have a parent who is incarcerated. So if you break that down, we're looking at about one child per 28 students in your classroom. So it's safe to say that someone in your classroom is experiencing this. So with that said, I think what we need to understand is we have to normalize these conversations in saying that family structures look very different. A weekend, a family trip could be going to the institution, to the prison, and visit mom or dad. That is part of the family experience. So normalizing these conversations with people and saying, hey, this is something that's out there and we have these resources available to you. I think what, as I mentioned earlier with my example, what has helped is bringing these resources to the children. Again, children may not be speaking about these experiences. A lot of times the children that we serve tend to say, their parent is vacationing, they work in another state or whatever it may be. That's what they've been sharing. Or the child may not know that their parent is incarcerated because their caregiver hasn't shared that information with them. So it becomes a challenge for us to share resources that are simply located somewhere and not accessible to our kids. And that's why we, my thing is, let's push these resources and talk about this, whether it's in a PTA meeting, offer that information. QR codes are very helpful. In the past, even approaching, and I say this in our tabling events, we would have families that would just kind of come and kind of sneak in the resource, our pamphlets and so on, because they didn't want their friends to see what they were picking up. QR codes are very helpful. You take pictures of that information, whether it's a website, a list of items, that they can seek and so on. So that's my that would be my advice in terms of that is we want to normalize these conversations and understand that folks are children are dealing with these issues.
Thank you, Liz. Debbie?
When I think about authentic engagement, as everybody was speaking, I was thinking about two words that we talk a lot about in supporting our family structures, and it's entitlement and claiming. And I guess what I think about is whoever the identified parent is, that we support their feelings of entitlement to parent and to advocate and to be at the table for their child when we're thinking about engagement at school. Because a lot of our parents often say they don't see me that way. They want to call the social worker. I don't bring value to the table. I can't advocate for my son or daughter. Or in adoption, we often say, well, you're not really the real parent. Who's the real parent here? Which then leads, if we support the entitlement, we support then the parent to be able to claim the child that's theirs. And so that, I guess that would be my most important message, is really helping to support them in their entitlement to parent, whatever that looks like.
Thank you, Debbie. Regina?
When I think of authentic engagement, I think of knowing that, especially for me, I come from a place of doing community and family engagement and capacity building and advocacy work through system change. And I always just go back into, if I was those parents that I am in service of, how do I want to be welcomed and how do I want to be treated? And knowing that my story matters. And also I am bringing a value to the table. And sometimes that might seem like it's my privileged mindset of like the fact that I do see myself as a contributor, but also holding myself in, and for us as an org, holding ourselves accountable to make sure that first and foremost, how are we doing our work in order for us to work alongside the families that we're in service of, and not only just parents, but also like our youth, knowing that the work that we're doing is like we're taking their wisdom and we're infusing it into the work. Kenya, I don't know if you know, but I think Quasey's here. But SPEB is part of UPlan, United Parent Leaders Action Network, and it's a space that we're so proud of because nationally, it's an organization that is made up of 35 organizations across the nation, and we're growing. And it's all organizations that are parent-led and parent-infused. And it's, you know, the advocacy that those families are doing and those youth across the nation, it's just amazing. So to witness that joy, it just takes me back to, you know, how we hold ourselves accountable to continue evaluating how authentic this work is. And when you are talking about families, you have to be in co-design and co-creation with them. You cannot do it for them and just bring something. But in order for us to do system change work, we need to make sure that we actually acknowledge that families, all dynamic of families, whether it's kinship, whether it's adopted, whether it's, you know, families that are showing up differently from what normally is expected in historically, which is like the perfect mother and the perfect father. Well, we're not in those times anymore. Things have changed and our family's dynamic have completely shifted. So whoever is that main person, that adult that is showing up for that child, we need to trust that actually they have more knowledge and more access because they're the ones that spend the most time with that, you know, scholar and that child, that brilliance. So we need to take that wisdom from them and bring it back to our school spaces, bring it back to our conversations so that we can be in service of that child in a very transparent and transformational way that can impact their life in a healthy way, rather than continuing the cycle of harming children.
Thank you so much, Regina, for that. A couple of things that I wanted to add in about thinking about authentically engaging families. One of the tactics that we used to do in our district, and we use data to help lead and guide some of our conversations. And I know it may seem odd, but when we did a demographic analysis of where our children were from and what was their experience. So if we had X percentage of homeless families or families who were in transitional housing, if we were developing advisory committees to be able to review policies and things along that lines, we tried to make sure that the weights of who was at the table matched the representation of those populations in the district. And so that we could make sure that we weren't leaving anybody behind as we were thinking about designing policy. The second piece of that was we were intentional about making sure that we were not leaning into EduSpeak and sharing information in ways that parents both could understand and then also act upon, because we don't go to our doctor and believe that we can understand all medical jargon. Why do we believe something or practice that in educational jargon? So two of those were two tactics that we did to be able to intentionally integrate families and have a data point to be able to reflect that. Another piece that I wanted you all to lean into before we move on to Kwesi with some reflection summaries, I'd love for you in the Q&A, the people are asking about where are organizations that they can go to be able, that are modeling this practice well. And so Regina has talked about her own district in Highline. Is there a district across the country that you think is doing exceptional work in this area, or a community-based organization that's different from yours that you would say, hey, I would suggest that you all go and take a look at their some of the work that they're doing? I'm going to start with Debbie.
Well, that's a tough question. I might answer it a little differently. Is something that I'm excited about that will be available nationally is that we've just created a state-of-the-art web-based training program to heighten school-based mental health providers in better understanding the population of children that I've talked about, kinship and foster and adoption. That will be available free throughout the entire country next month. And so all communities could embrace this training. I mean, I think they're wonderful organizations that specialize in working with the foster and adoption and kinship population. Casey Family Programs, the National Adoptable Council on Children. I guess the best I have to offer right now is is thinking about how we can continue the training for ourselves to better serve the children that we're speaking about today.
Thank you for that. Regina, is there an org or a district that you'd like to highlight for the audience?
Um,
I put them on the spot, so y'all give them a little grace.
I know this is a hard one.
No, I would say, you know, I think in order for us to serve families and children, it's not only about school. There's so many other systems that impact. And in the midst of the pandemic, right before the pandemic happened, there is a neighborhood that is historically Black residents, but it's being extremely like gentrified. And few of us, seven different organizations, alongside with the Renton School District, came together and we created what's called the Skyway Coalition. And we were able to lever in the last 2 years, close to $20 million from both the county and the state. And that's not even enough. We're not stopping there. There's like more money that needs to go into it because there's mass development. You know, there's unpolluted, there's polluted land that also like sits next to schools, like elementary schools. So, and this is a neighborhood that both the state and the county neglected for a very long time. And it took, you know, community advocating. So when I think of examples, you know, that's a good space, but also U-Plan, our national organization, is a great example. If people wanna, you know, show up, if we have either webinars or when we have our big gatherings in DC, for those of you guys that might be in DC, more than welcome to join us. But it's just amazing. I mean, you see the most amazing parent leaders across the country who are so passionate about serving other families and children, and they're like the aunties and the uncles across this nation. But it's also centering the work that we need to do for communities that have been historically marginalized, but doing it from a healing trauma approach. So one thing that I do want to leave is that one word I love to use, and there's few people that are on this Zoom that know this, is that I always say that advocacy has to be done through a social justice healing approach. So we cannot do it in a way where we show up and we engage in system change work where we re-traumatize ourselves, because that does not do justice for us. So self-care for me through advocacy is a priority.
Thank you so much, Regina. Liz?
Yes. So what I would, the question is if there's an organization that we can refer folks to. Because incarceration does look different in every state, because we have federal and state prisons, so it does look uniquely different in terms of the services that are available to families and so on. However, the information we can say is pretty much the same in terms of the needs of the children and families. There's an organization that I found, they're based out of Los Angeles, and it's called Advocates for Children of Incarcerated Parents. And it was founded by a child who had incarcerated parents. So I found a lot of good information. I was actually quite impressed because it is challenging for us to find information specifically in our case for children of incarcerated parents with the state prisons, because that's what we serve. So in this case, they have included a lot of information pertaining to the pandemic. There's a huge shift in terms of visiting across the country. The pandemic did open up these new doors in terms of connection, where children and families can connect with their incarcerated parents, very similar to how you and I are connecting now through video visits. Unfortunately, some of these, some institutions are opting to get rid of in-person visits in lieu of video visits. And we don't want that. We have a lot of research that supports that in-person visits are extremely beneficial to children and incarcerated parents. With that said, I encourage folks to check this website out, mainly because of the information that is available, the most recent information regarding children of incarcerated parents, statistical information. There's some good readings included in here, and also resources that you can offer families as well. So it's, if it helps, it's afcoip.org. Thank you, Kenya.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you all for just highlighting the responsibility that we have around intentionally building bridges, and also highlighting the power of, if we come together and utilize the resources that we have in our community by engaging other orgs who have the privilege of also serving our family, we can actually shift power. Regina, I am so impressed that you said not only did we get $20 million, we actually gonna ask for more. So I leave you before we turn over to Kwesi around having audacious ask in the way that we should operate for our children, and us really being bold about what we expect for our families. I'm now going to turn it over to Kwesi Rollins, who has done a tremendous amount of work in helping to lead the way for authentically engaging families and really creating welcoming environments and really setting the protocols for how we should be doing this across the country, to be able to give us some brief reflections on some of the attendees, the thoughts and comments before we go over to Q&A. So if you would, if you have questions, please use the question and answer function, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kwesi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kenya. So this is, and thanks again to the panel, such a powerful panel and a coming together. And I won't take up much time so that Kenya can go back to addressing some of the questions in the Q&A, but please do put your questions in there. But I think, throughout all of this conversation, we heard quite a few kind of key words, and if you think about doing a keyword search, if you add a keyword to your search, then certain pieces of information will come to you that might not if you didn't have that keyword. And so here, obviously, engagement, authenticity, relationship, facilitating connections, intentionality. Very few people will tell you it's a bad idea to have a welcoming environment. But having said that, what is it that we have to actually do to change our behaviors to have a welcoming environment? What do we have to do? And that's where the word intentionality comes in. And even in terms of accommodating special needs and special circumstances, someone commented that translation was insufficient, and that's absolutely right. Translation and interpretation is a form of accommodation, like so many other forms of accommodation, but they're really bare minimums. They're not authentic engagement in and of themselves. They're tools to help facilitate better connection, better relationship. And that's what we heard in a variety of examples here. A lot of districts received a lot of money. There was a question about ESSER funds. Some of those districts have used those funds in that way. Some of them are figuring out. Many districts have always had flexibility on how they spend funds in terms of community liaison work. And so this new flexibility, isn't something that has been a barrier. It's really about strategy. As Regina said, it's about parents and families and community members really exercising some voice and trying to influence decisions on how budgets get spent and influence how we look at how money was spent. And, in America is compared to a lot of other parts of the world, we have a kind of a unique set of family structures, even though everyone would still like to think that we still have the kind of nuclear family as the prime example in this country, but we really don't. We've got all kinds of folks that are involved. We've got all kinds of folks who should be treated as family. I was a caring adult. I mentored a young man through Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I was basically his father figure. And I went to parent-teacher conferences on his behalf when he was in elementary school. And I wasn't family in that traditional sense, but I was a caring adult that was part of his support system. And I think when you think about what we have to do to create a better system of engagement and a better system where authenticity can come alive, we've got to think more closely about what are the unique contexts in which our kids exist, in which our families exist. And how are we doing, you know, our best job to really make that connection, to strengthen those partnerships. Philadelphia, and for some of you who come to the conference this year, Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia has a really unique program that was quite successful pre-pandemic. I think it's back up and running now, where they had a specifically designed partnership with their Department of Corrections to facilitate family engagements for incarcerated fathers. And they did it through Zoom meetings. And so this, you know, so obviously you have to have a partnership, because you've got to make sure that the incarcerated parent can access Zoom from prison, right? But that's how they had regular meetings with the teacher and the kids and their incarcerated fathers. And it was quite a powerful experience for those that participated, and just a win-win if we think about win-wins. So that's just one example. And those kind of things, as Liz said, every local context in terms of incarceration is different, but in many respects, our only limitations is our own creativity and our own knowing about it and our own asking about it. Well, why can't we do this? Why can't, especially now where many people incarcerated do have access to internet regularly and could actually do that. And so there's no limitation in facilitating those kind of connections, as an example. And so I just want to, you know, I'll stop. I want Kenya for you to really, you know, go through some of these great questions. But I think what's on all of us is to figure out in our own role how we can do a better job of facilitating connections and getting beyond just the concept of engagement and the concept of authenticity, because everybody agrees with the concept of things, right? But it's in our behavior. How are we behaving? How are we acting? How are we making decisions? How are we facilitating? How are we, you know, doing things that are at times that are convenient for parents and families? How are we doing all of the little things that might actually create a more welcoming environment and might lead to more authenticity? And so in many respects, we're preaching to the choir on this webinar. I'm sure this isn't a foreign language, or this isn't anything that folks haven't heard before. And we all know that even the choir needs a good sermon from time to time. Right? Because we're in the change business, so we need to be pumped up ourselves. But there are some great examples out there. And so we've got to find them, we've got to use them, we've got to push the envelope. And I keep picking on Regina because I haven't seen it for a while, but as she said, we're not stopping there, we're asking for more. And that's the attitude one has to have to get what one wants. We're not stopping there, we're going to keep asking for more. So with that, Kenya, take it away and take on some of the Q&A.
Well, Kwesi, thank you so much. You made me remember my Kojic upbringing by saying even the choir needs a sermon. So even the choir got a praise team to help hype them up before they get going in many of our communities. And so I appreciate our panelists for really illuminating not only their work, but helping us to see opportunities for ways that we each could be engaging. And what I hope that they have done is really pricked your spirit to think about how you could be more intentional about engaging all different types of families, how you can break down some of the biases that we have, both conscious and unconscious, towards families in our communities, and also how you could really leverage the power of families and our students even more to be able to ask for audacious change. Eve Sullivan asked an amazing question in the Q&A box that each of you have the opportunity to do while we go over this Q&A session. What Eve says is parenting education is really become a third rail of parent and family engagement because we don't really talk about parent education enough. Could you share with us on the roles that parenting programs have in your work, and if these programs play a role in like the impact of your work at all? I'm going to start with Regina to ask that question.
Thank you, Eve, for that question. I think I'm very cautious to say parent education because I think it's more like, how do we co-learn so that we can undo and also be in service of children? So I know that, historically there's like, oh, there's a parent workshop, it's fixing the parents. But we don't know, it's not fixing the parents. It is building their capacity and also creating opportunities so that they can take care of their family. They can bring their wisdom back to us so that we can be in service of them in a better way and do it in a very, authentic way. So I always say, I understand where Eve's question is coming from. And also I think our schools, and particularly, I want to bring this back to why actually we're here today, which is the National PTA. The National PTA has a lot of influence. And historically, I know that a lot of the communities that were in service of PTA, there's a lot of stigma around it. But how do we actually shift that and make sure that PTA is shifting away? And I know that right now at a national level, community and family engagement, anti-racist work, racial equity work is a priority. But how do we make sure that actually we can ask our families without stigmatizing them, how do you want to get to the next level you want? Without stigmatizing them, asking them, if we have parents in our school that, need to get, an AA or want to go back to school, how do we lever our influences to make sure that we're actually supporting? Because if we build the capacity of community, we all thrive together and we close a huge wealth gap. And we make sure that those children are going to have more opportunities and access long-term.
Thank you, Regina. Debbie or Liz, can you talk a little bit about the role that parents play and if parenting education plays a role in your model design? Debbie, unmute.
When you think about our name, the Center for Adoption Support and Education, I mean, education has always been part of our fabric. And I want to echo what Regina was saying about community. I mean, I think that's what we've strived to create, this collective impact by bolstering and empowering our community. And always education is a part of what we do, and families a part of what we do. We don't treat children in isolation. And I think we give our community a voice. So I think it's critical. But it's ongoing. I guess I want to say it's like paints of coat. You have to keep brushing it over and over again. It's not one and done. And you have to really listen to what your community needs, not what you think that they need. And I do see our parents often as the experts of their children, no matter how we define what a parent is.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you, Debbie. I want to share an experience I had not too long ago, actually. In December, we had our holiday event for our families that, participated in our program and so on. And I got to speak to a parent who shared, in conversation, she shared that her 8-year-old child was sharing her experience. She has an incarcerated parent, her dad's incarcerated. And she was talking about this in class, and and my understanding is she was just sharing like, oh, I'm gonna get to talk to my dad through Zoom this weekend or something to that effect. And she just mentioned that he was incarcerated. And the parent explained to me that a couple of days after, she got a call from the school, and they were asking, I guess they were asking regarding her, the child's dad being incarcerated. And even in speaking to the parent, her reaction, I mean, she was reliving this experience. I can see that she was highly stressed and mentioned that, I don't want a case opened on me. I don't understand why they're calling me. And I just told I just told my child never to talk about this again with anybody. Don't tell them that, dad's in prison. Don't just, that's something that we keep at home and so on. And oh my God, it just pierced my heart because, what that's doing is silencing that child. This was a good experience that she was speaking about. Child was excited about connecting with dad. She had never seen dad in person and was excited for this connection. So the fact that the stigma is so potent, not just with children, but as I mentioned earlier, we all perpetuate that stigma and we continue to do so. Mom inadvertently just silenced her child, and that tells me, and I'm sure that the school was reaching out perhaps to offer some resources or whatever it may be, but that's not how the parent viewed it. She felt instantly threatened. So that's telling me that there's a disconnect in the conversation that's happening here. So with that, I mentioned earlier, let's bring these resources to the classroom, to the children, right? We want to do that with the parents as well. When we have these conversations, I recall even now, we get these pamphlets and flyers with our child, when she comes home from school, of all these resources available, but we don't have those conversations and saying, hey, these things are happening, and these are steps that you can take in advising the parents. Something as simple as having the conversation will do so much in mitigating that stigma that we all, collectively share. And I say that I'm speaking for everyone, but it just tells me that if the parent felt this uncomfortable to the point where she was reliving the experience speaking to me, this is a bigger issue than what we've made it out to be. So with that, I share, not per se educating the parent, but having these conversations and embracing the fact that families do look different. And again, it is not the child's fault, and that child should not be, made felt like they're accountable or responsible for what's happening. So thank you, Kenya.
Thank you all. There's a question from an attendee around, are there specific programs or events? And I actually think, Liz, you talked about this, how you have an annual event to be able to engage incarcerated families. Are there any other tactics that you think that PTAs could do to host, to celebrate the diverse families and communities that we have?
In terms of the school engaging with the children and the families,
Yes.
yes. Without it's a challenge, because we would be very much, if we were to say, hey, today is the day where system impacted families come by and engage and so on. I'm not sure from the school setting, but what I will share is we just locally, whenever we have our family participants, we tend to follow up with the families in the summer with we haven't had in a couple of years, but it's essentially like a summer event where we go to a local parish that has beautiful grounds here in Pacific Palisades area. And what it is it brings the children together. All the people that participated in our Get on the Bus program that spring now come together. We have a field day. They have a swimming pool. The grounds are gorgeous for the children to run around. We have giveaways for the children. But what I have noticed is these children know that there's other children that are going through the same experiences with them, right? And the level of comfort that you see, because now it's become some sort of, it's become a community for them where they are speaking about, oh, my dad is at so-and-so institution. Oh yeah, I remember going there, or something to that effect. Now they're having these conversations with their peers. So actively, perhaps the school may not be able to host these events, but I encourage everyone to look into their local community and seek these resources where these children can come together, because it is very helpful, and it's absolutely beautiful to see. Once you see them out of their shell and speaking to one another and engaging, it's just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I want to maybe echo what Liz is sharing in that, as I talked about National Adoption Month, and I agree, maybe the school can't do it, but really align with community partners like all of us, where we have a big celebration the second Saturday of the month in November. And we have a program called the Kids Adoption Network Carnival, and it's from first graders to 12th graders. And we have about 150 youth adopted from all walks of life, foster care, private adoption, international, come together. It's really a conference for them, and we address the activities around very specific issues that we've seen the kids struggle with throughout the year. And then we have a parallel parent program. But in the morning, I always start the morning off with, what's special about today? And it's always the second or first grader that raises their little hand and says, we're all adopted. And then I ask everybody in the room to stand up who's adopted. And there might be 130 people, and they turn around, and I think it gets to Liz's point, is it normalizes the feelings of differentness for that one day. And it's interesting because the age group that's sort of fills up first, you'd be really surprised, are the teenagers. So why would teenagers want to get up on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock and come to a conference about adoption? Because it's the one place, as Liz said, where whether they're talking about a parent being incarcerated, or, I lived in an orphanage in Russia for 15 years, or I don't know who my birth parents are. I was left in a dumpster to die and somebody found me. We all have something in common. And I think that's maybe the partnering that we have to do with our school systems is we be the resources around some of these issues.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Panelists and audience, I want us to take a moment to be able to say thank you to Liz, Debbie, and Regina for blessing us with their insight this afternoon. We never have enough time to be able to do all we want to do. So I'm going to use this point of privilege to really ask the panelists to succinctly give us one specific takeaway that you want to make sure you leave with the audience that gives them a specific action, policy, or concrete next step that they can take to be able to make a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all families. I'm going to start with Liz.
Thank you, Kenya. One action item, if there's one thing, invest 5 minutes into this here. If you can go to youth.gov, specifically, there's a dropdown that you can find for children of incarcerated parents. And there's some resources, some data information available regarding system impacted families. But what I encourage everyone to do here, particularly our educators who have interaction with children, is to print out this, it's called a tip sheet for teachers is what it is. And there's just 5 points in there. It's a 2-pager. Print that out, read it, keep it close to you. And it's giving you the basic information that you need to support these children. And also you'll find some resources that you can offer the families. So again, take a couple minutes after this call, because if you're like me, you're going to forget in 10 minutes. So if you can do that as I'm speaking, I would really appreciate that. And I'm sure children and families will appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, I want to touch on the issue of school stability. So we know with a lot of the children that we support that they often have to change schools often and frequently. And I guess the call to action would be to do everything you could to keep youth in the same school, particularly those in foster care, even if they have to move to another home, because you become their support system. And every time we rip them from that support system, it affects all aspects of their well-being. So I guess I would do that, and also ask for create an electronic accessible educational passport. So if they do move, our kids say, everything about me gets lost. I have to start all over again. So those would be my 2 takeaways.
Thank you, Debbie. Regina?
Thank you. I think my biggest takeaway, and then my biggest ask, which I always ask, is for all of us that are in school spaces in service of family, let's work closely with our school districts, like all across, so that across the country, we actually have a streamline Because what's happening is that you move from one district to another, policies are different. And a lot of times our families actually don't even know what policies our districts have. So I think if we want to do legacy work that is system change, and that takes a lot of work, it's like, it's simple. Go to your school district, the districts that you work with, and just say, can I just look at your policies? Can I read your policies? Engage families to attend school board meetings, but also build the capacity of families so that it's not adversarial work. Because in order for us to do system change, we also need to show some grace to educators because they don't make enough. They have hard work and they are frustrated. And we also need to, I guess, like, this is a burden that some of us that work in community that we have to carry. And it's unfortunate, but it's also a passion work, is that let's continue to be in a relationship with the educators, because our kids are in those buildings for 6-7 hours a day, sometimes more, depending if they have to stay after school. So that's my biggest thing, is just, we need to stay on top of policy, but also we need to hold grace and center humility, because that's the only way that we're going to make change. We can't be in war in two different sides.
Regina, thank you so much for highlighting that. As you all know, we are all in this together, and how I started was saying that we need to operate even more as a community. The education of our children is all of our responsibility, and so I am extremely grateful for the tools, techniques, and tips that you have equipped us with to be able to do that. Daniel has put in information in the chat for each of you all as participants in some resources, and I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel and the PTA. I want to thank them for creating the space for us to have this beautiful conversation this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Kenya. I just have to say this was a lovely conversation, and I have to thank everybody that was a part of this. So thank you so much to Kenya Bradshaw, our incredible moderator, for moderating such a lovely conversation, to our 3 incredible panelists, Debbie Riley, Regina Elmy, Liz Rios. Thank you, all 3 of you, for being here and being part of such a great conversation and really centering community in all of your work and uplifting the work that everybody else is doing and here listening in on. Before I close us out, I do want to remind everyone that this session was recorded. We have also recorded the chat, and we will be sending this out to everyone in a follow-up email, including all of those incredible resources that were shared by our panelists. And I just want to also take a minute to launch a quick Zoom poll just to gather some feedback on the webinar. So you will see this Zoom poll pop up right now. So while I'm closing us out, please feel free to fill this out just to see what we can improve upon in our future webinar sessions. Our next Transforming Family School Partnerships with PTAs National Standards webinar will be on Wednesday, February 15th. The focus of the session will be on communicate effectively, and we will hear from 4 incredible panelists. Hee-Jae Lim, who is the founder and CEO of Talking Points, Dr. Sue Hong, Professor of Education at Wellesley College, Alejandro Gibes de Gac, CEO and founder of Springboard Collaborative, and Yesenia Ramirez, who is co-founder and senior advisor of Parent-Teacher Home Visits. And you'll hear about more of their work, and specifically about advancing standard number 2 of our 6 PTA national standards. So everyone that registered for today's webinar has also been registered for the other webinars in this series. We really encourage you to share this registration link that I'm putting in the chat right now with all of your colleagues and contacts, because we have so much more conversation to have around this subject. Once again, thank you all for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you in February. Have a great day, everyone.